Skeletal muscle fibers are different in their power, their speed, and their duration of muscle contraction. So the power is related to the diameter of the muscle fiber because large muscle fibers have a larger number of myofibrils that are in parallel. So that allows them to produce a more powerful contraction. Speed is described based on whether the skeletal muscle fibers express the slow or fast genetic variant of the enzyme called ATPase. That's the enzyme that breaks ATP down. So those that have the fast variant are called fast twitch fibers, and those with the slow variant, yeah, figured that out, did you? Those are your slow twitch fibers. Fast twitch fibers also have a fast rate of propagating action potentials along the sarcolemma. They also release calcium very quickly from the sarcoplasmic reticulum and take it back into the SR quickly as well. So the fast twitch fibers initiate contraction more quickly than a slow twitch fiber. Now, the slow twitch fibers are going to produce a longer duration of contraction. And we're going to go into each one of these. So let's go through this again. Fast twitch fibers typically produce a strong contraction. They initiate contraction quickly, produce a shorter duration of contraction. So this is why fast twitch fibers have more power and speed as compared to the slow twitch. So I mentioned on the previous slide that there are two criteria for classifying the skeletal muscle. Well, we just talked about one of those, the speed and the duration, right? The power. So the second is all about ATP. Yeah, you knew we'd get there, right? So to differentiate skeletal muscle fibers using how they get their energy, we look at whether or not the means the fiber uses to supply ATP is aerobic or glycolysis, which is anaerobic, exactly. So when we talk about oxidative fibers, they specialize in making ATP through aerobic cellular respiration. Okay, remember that's glycolysis, transition, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, right? Lots of ATP, okay? So they have several features that allow that to happen. They have an extensive capillary network, which means good blood supply. A whole lot of mitochondria, a whole lot of powerhouses, right? That's where we make ATP. And also a large supply of a red pigment molecule called myoglobin. So the presence of myoglobin in those excess mitochondria is what gives that skeletal muscle more of a red appearance, and therefore they're sometimes called red fibers. So the higher levels of ATP generated provides energy for these oxidative fibers to continue contracting over a long period of time without tiring. So we call these fibers fatigue resistance. Now, on the other hand, glycolytic fibers specialize in making ATP through glycolysis. Now think back again when you learned about glycolysis and cell respiration. Glycolysis doesn't make a lot of ATP, right? Because it never goes into the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. So with that said, your glycolytic fibers have fewer structures that would be used for aerobic respiration. So they have a less extensive capillary bed, fewer mitochondria, don't need as much to make ATP because we're not making much ATP, and also smaller amounts of myoglobin. So the small amount of myoglobin in mitochondria gives these skeletal muscle fibers more of a white appearance, hence they're called white fibers. However, they do have a lot of glycogen. Now remember, glycogen is that storage molecule that we can break down to supply glucose for glycolysis. So that's useful for these white fibers when oxygen is low. So the glycolytic fibers tend to tire easily after a short period of muscle activity. We call them fatigable because think about it. If you're not making enough ATP, it's going to tire faster. So let's look at this turkey here. Okay, so the breast of a turkey and the upper part of the wing are white fibers. Yeah, you know that's white meat turkey, right? Well, think about it. How often does a turkey need to fly? Well, they tire fast, right? We talked about this. Your glycolytic white fibers, few mitochondria, not a good blood supply, not a lot of myoglobin, not a lot of ATP. They tire fast. Well, that's good because turkeys are not going to be flying much, so it doesn't matter if those muscles tire quickly. However, let's look over here at this, our dark meat on a turkey. Well, that's your leg, that's your thigh, right? Well, doesn't a turkey use that a whole lot more than they do their wing and their breast tissue? Absolutely. Turkeys walk around, they jump, they flutter from place to place, they run. So they have more of the dark meat, which are the slower red fibers, because they make ATP by going through the whole cellular respiration process. I bet you'll think differently now when you're eating chicken and turkey. So let's look at the three types of skeletal muscle fibers and classify them based on how they make ATP. So again, the slow oxidative fibers typically have about half the diameter of the other skeletal muscle fibers. They contain the slow ATPase, which means they break down ATP slowly. They produce contractions that are slower and less powerful, but they can contract over long periods of time without fatigue. That's because ATP is supplied through the aerobic cellular respiration, where we make more ATP. So these fibers usually appear dark red because of the large amount of myoglobin and mitochondria. Make a lot of ATP, right? All right, second classification is the fast oxidative. Sometimes we call those the intermediate fibers. They're the least abundant of the skeletal muscle fiber types. They're sort of intermediate in size as compared to the fast oxidative, or I'm sorry, the slow oxidative or the fast glycolytic. So they contain fast ATPase, break down ATP, make it fast. They produce a fast, powerful contraction because there's plenty of ATP available because it's undergoing aerobic cellular respiration. Now, the vascular supply to these fast oxidative is less extensive than that network of capillaries that we have in the slow oxidative, so the delivery rate of nutrients and oxygen is slower. So the fibers also contain myoglobin, less than we find in the slow oxidative though. So that means these fibers can be distinguished from the slow oxidative microscopically because they appear a lighter red than the red fibers that are slow oxidative. And our third, of course, are the fast glycolytic, also called fast anaerobic. So anaerobic tells you what? No oxygen. So how are we making ATP? Glycolysis, exactly. So these are the most prevalent skeletal muscle fiber type. They're the largest in diameter and they contain fast ATPase. So this provides power and speed. However, there's a downside to that. Because the power and the speed, they can only contract for short periods of time because ATP is provided by glycolysis. So these fibers appear white because of the very, very little amount of myoglobin and mitochondria. Okay, so we talked about the fiber types and gave the example of the turkey a while ago and the chicken. Let's talk a little bit more about the human now. So most muscles contain a mix of all three fiber types, but the relative percentage varies greatly based on the muscles of the body and the functions of that muscle. So, for example, the muscles of your eye require very fast but short contractions. So they're going to contain a high percentage of your fast glycolytics. In contrast, slow oxidative fibers are going to dominate your postural muscles in the back and your calves. They contract almost continuously to help us maintain our upright posture. Okay? So variations are seen most dramatically in very well-trained, high-caliber athletes. So if you have a distance runner, they're going to have a higher proportion of slow oxidative fibers in their lower limb muscles, so the leg muscles. top athletes that do things with just brief, intense periods of activity like weightlifting or sprinting, they're going to have a higher percentage of the fast glycolytic. Now, part of this is determined by genes, and part of it is simply by training, because sometimes these fibers have the ability to transition from one type to another to meet demand.